Fantasy Fixers, we are looking at the Houston Texans, who it looked for all the world was going to get the #1 overall pick, but then they win in Week 18. They get bounced to the #2 pick in the NFL draft. You can find these, of course, at fantasylife.com. And Dwayne, the Houston Texans, we look at them overall. It seems like the easy answer for what's wrong with them is everything. But if you're going to be a little bit more specific, how do you summarize this team?
I think everything is a really good specific summary for the Texans. It's a complete dumpster fire, 3-13-1 on the season. And they just rank poorly everywhere, Marcus. Like whether we talk about offensive yards per game, 31st, points per game, 30th, EPA per play on offense, 32nd, PFF grade on offense, 32nd. Like, you know, that was a sweep. You swept everything there. Defense is really the same, like 30th in yards given up, 27th in points, EPA 26th, and PFF grade 31st. So the good news is they can literally target anything they want, and it's going to make their team better. Now, they're going to have to put together their plan to make sure they prioritize the right things, and I think that's what we're really going to help them with today. The other good news is with the trade of Deshaun Watson, they do have extra ammunition this year in the draft. They've got 5 selections in the first 3 rounds, including an additional first rounder, the 12th overall pick from that trade.
So 2022 was a triple crown of tragedy for the Houston Texans. If things are going to get better in 2023, we have some recommendations. First thing on the docket, what should be the first thing the Texans go out and try to fix next year?
Well, I know this is really like hard-hitting analysis here, but they're going to have to draft a quarterback. And you mentioned what happened, getting bumped down to pick 2. They were at pick 1. They were going to be able to take whoever they wanted. Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud were typically they're thought of as the top 2 guys. If you had one you preferred, you may not get that one. But the good news is you're going to get one of 2. What I would advise the Texans on is I would not trade up to get the other one. I think these 2 guys are very close. I think they both have flaws. They both have things that are going to make them difficult in ways to scout because they've been surrounded with so much good talent. So I would go with who is available to me. And I would not trade up and give away additional draft capital to move one spot. And they're going to be tempted to because the team you mentioned, the Colts, sitting at 4, are now in striking distance. The Bears, they could very easily continue on with who they have at Justin Fields, and that's going to make them willing to move down. So they need to get a quarterback with one of the first 2 picks, and that in itself, we're not going to probably want to draft that quarterback next year in fantasy. Neither one of these guys are scramblers, which is a plus for rookie quarterbacks. They're really more pocket guys. But if we can make some additional moves, add some additional pieces around them, they could be good enough to help support some fantasy viable options in 2023, unlike what we saw this year.
It is going to be key for them to not panic in case a team decides to move up ahead of them, just because, as you mentioned, they have so many needs. They should keep some of those assets, try to build as much as possible, but certainly Davis Mills shown that he is not the answer there. So that's one thing down. Next thing, if they are going to improve what they did from 2022, something they should or maybe shouldn't do in 2023.
Yeah, they need to avoid running back in the draft. Why? Because they have Dameon Pierce. They took him in the 4th round. It's probably a home run pick. And looking at what he did this year across a lot of the metrics that we like to look at, PFF rush grade, Marcus, 9th, 84.8 out of 43 running backs with at least 150 attempts. Missed tackles forced per attempt, first at 0.28. And then if we look at yards after contact, he was 9th at 3.3. So this is a guy that can get it done. The other part is we have seen him in college actually serve as someone that can work in the receiving game. He's also shown to be a capable blocker in the passing game. So I think there's an opportunity for Dameon Pierce to turn into a true every down back. There's an opportunity for the Texans to conserve their draft capital, to be able to put it towards other positions that are going to better help their team. Of course, if they ignore what we have to say here at Fantasy Fixers, it's going to be a problem for Dameon Pierce because we've seen these hyper-productive backs without a lot of draft capital. When you bring someone else in that does have the draft capital, examples, Michael Carter, James Robinson, it really does hurt their fantasy value. So hopefully the Texans will listen to us and we get an RB1 next year out of Dameon Pierce.
I know there's that debate about RB values and how much draft capital you spend on one. And as you mentioned, we've seen a lot of guys go later in drafts who've turned out to be productive, but it seems like they've got a good one there in Dameon Pierce. And I don't know that there should be a big fuss to try and add something to that backfield. If you have one more recommendation for what the Houston Texans should do in 2023, that would be?
Yeah, they need to upgrade the wide receiver room. You're going to take a quarterback in the first 2 rounds. You want to give them something to build momentum. You want to give them something that can really be, the baseline for what their career is going to be as far as the chemistry that you can develop. A guy that's really been linked to the Texans early in mock drafts is Quentin Johnson out of TCU. Now, his draft stock may take a little bit of a hit after how he performed in the national championship game. I don't really know how much of that you can put on him when your quarterback's running around for their life the whole game. But if you look at what many of the draft nicks around the industry think about Quentin Johnson, they love him. If you look at Mike Renner from over at PFF, he says in terms of physical talent, he's right up there with anybody we have seen in the last decade. So that's an option that's going to be around whenever they get that second pick in the first round, which is at pick 12 from the Deshaun Watson trade. You've also got Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. The other thing I would say beyond just drafting a wide receiver, they need to keep Brandon Cooks. I know he's come out and said that he wants to leave, but if you want to win in the NFL today, you've got to have guys that can beat you with speed underneath, that can also beat you over the top. That way, when defense goes into max coverage, you can make them pay for the underneath throws. And if they want to come up and press because they're trying to get more guys into the box, or they think that they can throw your receivers off, maybe they're trying to stop your run game, you can still beat them over the top. And Brandon Cooks can still do both of those things. I know it did not turn out well for Brandon this year, but again, your point, we're dealing with Davis Mills, a big difference potentially with a rookie that we can bring in. I think if you have Brandon Cooks plus one of these other receivers in the first round, or if they decide even to use their second round pick, their early second round pick, there's still going to be wide receivers available. You make two of those moves. Then you have John Mechie potentially coming back next year. You've got Nico Collins. Those guys are battling for the 3 and 4 spots. I think we could have a big upgrade in the passing game.
And I think it's easier to do in the draft because we've seen the last few years, the draft classes have been very deep at the wide receiver position. And I think when you look out at the free agent market at wide receiver, there's not a whole lot there that I think you're going to be willing to go out and break the bank for. So this could be a way to go out and get some guys and get them kind of a very more team-friendly salaries at the same time to try and help build this roster there in Houston. Of course, those are our suggestions for what the Houston Texans should do this offseason. For you guys, if you have some thoughts, we'd love to hear them in the comments section as well.